Hello, Blazers. Welcome to episode 74 of UAB Green and Told, original debut June 20th, 2022. Through our podcast, we have the chance to share stories from members of the UAB community. Want to listen to past episodes? We can be found at alumni.uab.edu/greenandtold on Spotify or the Apple Podcast app. While there, leave a written review so other alumni can find us as well. I'm Greg Berry, a UAB alum and assistant director in the UAB Office of Alumni Affairs. Washington, D.C. is known for many things. Monuments, cherry trees, and politicians are all part of our nation's capital. For many, like today's guest, Lisa Joseph, the infatuation with D.C. happened in an instant, enamored by the city's beauty, culture, and long-standing history. But the strength of the players in the capital city can also draw you in.
I got to kind of see all of these super powerful people and the way they worked. And I was just an assistant to the executive vice president.
However, at times, the love affair is just that. An affair that wanes and leaves a bad taste in your mouth.
I had such a positive outlook when I first went to DC, but after spending that year and a half in the real world of DC, you get a little disillusioned.
But as we'll hear from Lisa, that disdainment for DC didn't last long.
That's when I finally hit that sweet spot of everything that fits my personality, and it's actually what I do today, but I just do it as a government employee.
When you check out the word indecision in the Merriam-Webster dictionary, you'll find the following definition: a wavering between two or more possible courses of action. Let's be real. We all struggle with making the right or wrong decisions all the time, which can lead to us teetering between a myriad of choices. For Lisa Joseph, her early adulthood was plastered with indecisions. Not only did she toy with taking classes at Auburn and Birmingham Southern, it took her a while to figure out what she wanted to study.
I was one of those people that I changed my major, I don't know, like maybe 5 times. Okay, so I could not find the fit. I'd always loved history and I'd always been a big reader. So I'd always thought of that, but I always had this notion of, well, what kind of job is that going to bring? But anyway, after just absolutely disliking all of my classes in every other major, I finally was like, you know what, I'll just make it work. So I'm going to study history. So it was nice to finally arrive at that decision.
So was there anything growing up that drew you to history, or was it just one of those things, well, you know what, political history sounds interesting, I'm going to go that route?
I had always been fascinated by just things that had happened before and that had influenced where we are today in the world. And I don't know why, but I used to always ask, I think 9/11 and being a young kid during 9/11 was really impactful, because I remember being in 7th grade and wondering, like, wait, what is happening? I don't understand anything. And then as I grew up and understood, I got really into learning about the Middle East. And at first, because I was like, how do you get to the point in that area to where this is, fundamentalism and learning about that? So it started there. And then I also got I feel like every American sometimes gets into this. I had a foray into loving English history. So I loved all the kings and queens and watched the Tudors on repeat. I took a lot of classes at UAB on that too. So I've had periods of time where I've focused on different things in history.
You landed at UAB after going elsewhere for a short spell. Why was it UAB at that point? Why was it the perfect choice?
The hugeness of it just didn't really fit my personality, and I know that when you're in your first 2 years at school, no matter what, except for maybe a few classes, you're in classes of, hundreds of people. But I felt so lost in everything at Auburn. And so, and I'm close to my family. So I decided UAB because I just thought it would be very focused. So I was so ready to focus. And I felt like I couldn't do that. And when I got to UAB, I really felt I actually got to do that. And so that's kind of why I picked UAB. Birmingham Southern was thrown in there too, but I was all over the place, I love school. So I was like, I want to try all of them.
Are you kind of that way? Because you mentioned that you kind of jumped all over the place for finding a major. You went to Auburn, you looked at BSc, you wind up at UAB. Is that kind of your personality?
Yes, absolutely. And we'll get to it in a little bit, and I landed in consulting, which is exactly, that kind of area where, you sit on a project for 6 months and then you move to something else and, you get you challenge your brain in a whole new way. So yeah, I am I guess I get bored easy. And so I need to be continuously challenged. But in saying that, I really found my home at UAB and was challenged there consistently for the last 2.5 years of my schooling. And I was sad to leave.
What was the best part about taking classes and your experience here at UAB?
At UAB is when I fully switched to history, and I just can't say enough about that program and the professors. So, all of them influenced me in different ways. Dr. Corley was a very large influence on me. He brought me back he did a lot of US history, and I was very at that point I don't care about the US, it's so boring. But his classes, I finally understood. It kind of made me feel more appreciative of understanding where I come from and, studying Southern history. And he encouraged me to delve into that. Also, Dr. Keat, he has such a non-traditional way of teaching. Some of his classes, we acted out scenes in actual history, trials that went on, like Galileo and Darwin.
Oh, cool.
And so, yeah, it was just this whole different way of teaching. And I never felt when I was taking classes at UAB that, yes, they're all history classes, but none of them had the same structure or anything. So I was continuously challenged every day. And it being so different in each class, I never got bored, if that makes sense.
You wind up with a political history degree. That was concentration.
That was, yes. Yes.
So what is a political history degree? And there could have been a lot of students going that route.
No, and also I kind of made that a little bit in a sense. That's also another great thing about UAB. You can pick your focus. And after really getting into US history, and obviously that's a lot of politics, I decided to start taking classes that UAB agreed to count towards my major in political science. So one in particular was the presidency, I think was the class. So it was all about presidential power. And it was fitting really well into my history studies of current events and studying our political structures and different presidents and how power has risen each term. I started only focusing classes on that and Southern history. So melding political Southern history and political science into one. And I just kind of named it political history. So I would say it's more of a concentration.
Before you left your senior thesis, it was Woodrow Wilson, the South is in the saddle.
Mm-hmm.
A, why Woodrow Wilson? B, what was it about?
Oh, I love this. I haven't talked about this in a while. This was Dr. Corley too. So he, I had taken Dr. Doss's classes on the Civil War and and antebellum. So I'm antebellum South. Then I did the full, just in-depth Civil War, and then I took New South with Dr. Corley. And in that class, I just got so fascinated by the feelings of the people in the South around that time. So that's the time period of the early World War I to probably the 30s before World War II. And I might not say that correctly. He might slap my wrist. But I had been doing one of the things in his classes is he had us read presidential biographies, and then we had to do reports on them. And I had done Eisenhower, and Dr. Corley came to me for my thesis and said, you really need to look into Woodrow Wilson and its impact on the South. And I was like, when I think of Woodrow Wilson, I think of the League of Nations. I don't think of Southern history. So, after doing a lot of research, it was such a large movement for the South for him to be elected. And there's a few things he did. He segregated the Washington offices. They were desegregated at the time. He resegregated them. He put in power of major government branches definite segregationists. And he had this, there was new, the reason why it's called The South is in the Saddle is because news articles ran all over the South, and that was the title, The South is in the Saddle. He was born in Georgia, but grew up in Virginia. And it was very much, Southern voices who were feeling like they had been taken back by the North could finally hear their voices heard. And that was definitely Jim Crow era. And they felt like they had someone on their side. He was also a really good friend of, I'm going to butcher this, but I think Eugene Debs, The Birth of a Nation's writer and director, which was a movie. And and if anyone's not familiar, and it's an extreme propaganda film about African Americans harming white people. It's horrific if you watch it. But because they were friends at Princeton, he actually, and it's the first movie to ever be previewed at the White House. So it's these little things of racial history that Wilson kind of raised to a national level. And I'm not trying to completely diss his character, but this is something that people don't talk about with Wilson. So I didn't even touch on his League of Nations, which is, obviously eventually turns into the United Nations work, and his post-World War I work at all, because there's such a breadth of his impact down in the South that happens in that first term.
I don't think I'm going out on a limb to say Woodrow Wilson is not your favorite president. Who is your favorite president?
Oh, no. I have to say, this is tough. As far as I like someone who never became president, Bobby Kennedy. He never was president, but I think Bobby Kennedy was just one of these pivotal figures that would have been one of the best presidents we could have had. So sitting presidents, there's so many. I mean, I love Teddy Roosevelt. I feel like he was the real deal because I love his character. But yeah, I can't pick.
Okay. No, that's fair. That is fair. Towards the end of your UAB career, you wound up getting with the Washington Center,
yes.
An internship. Talk a little bit about that and exactly what the Washington Center is.
When I was coming to the end, I had just loved my degree so much, and I didn't really want this foray into politics to stop. And so Dr. Corley again said, you should try, instead of just going straight into a master's program, you should go work in politics. Go try your hand at it. And in one of my classes, representatives from UAB that promote the Washington Center came into a class and were talking about it. So what it is a program that's in Washington, D.C. And if you sign up for it and go, they give you a place to live. You take a class while you're there, and you get, I think, 14, you get a whole semester's worth of credit hours. I think it's 14 credit hours. But one of the great things is they do the back end work and place you in an internship. Okay. So because, especially for people from Alabama who might not have connections up in DC, because I didn't, they do that work for you. So you don't have to rely on connections. And they give you a couple of options of areas you want to intern in, and then you interview with people from DC over the phone. And then once you get up there, you're placed. So I was already set to graduate, and UAB had agreed, because I thought I wanted to do a master's program. UAB had agreed to let me go post-grad, and then I could come back and decide where to put those credits towards a master's. So my two options for master's was a history master's or the public policy master's. And so I hadn't decided which area to go to yet. So that's how I got up to Washington.
And for a while, you kind of stayed. Here you are, a young woman with a degree in political history, which begs the question, what do you do with the political history degree? But then you just kind of snowballed and stayed in DC for a while.
Yeah, I actually ended up staying for 10 years. So when I got up there, I just instantly fell in love. The energy is intense. I mean, at this point in time, it's not nearly as fun of a place to be in as it used to be. And that it does come to why I left DC. But when I first got there was such a positivity. And for the first time in a long time, everyone I was interacting with was just as like jazzed about things that I was. And so I just felt such a mutual energy going on that I wanted to stay. So I actually interned with a nonprofit. I chose a nonprofit because I was interested in how nonprofits function in the city. And I didn't get a place on the Hill, which I would have loved, but those are really hard to come by. And usually the Washington Center doesn't have places like that. But so I got this cool internship with a nonprofit that does educational programs all over the world. It wasn't like exactly what I wanted to do, but it got me there. And I just met so many people. It ended up meeting someone who had from the Washington Center who had come to do a talk with us about careers and future. And he ended up being a recruiter and took my number. And so I was, wasn't until months later that he called me with a spot. And then I decided to stay in DC. So it just kind of happened. I also met my husband during that time. So, and he was from New Hampshire. So that was a part where we were like, well, we can't leave DC because we have to stay here if we want to stay together. So there was a lot of things, but I'm very glad it worked out.
And while you were in DC, you did a bunch of different things. You worked for Halliburton in the Office of Government Affairs, Deloitte as a project delivery specialist, which you worked with the TSA in that position. Mm-hmm. What was kind of the goal with all of these different roles that you had?
So Halliburton was like my first big break. Like, it's so hard to get your first job. And it took me and my husband many months of looking. We both took like odd jobs, temping jobs until we could land like the first DC real job. And just to everybody out there who's, coming up on graduating, don't be discouraged. It's hard. But you just have to keep trying. So Halliburton was my first big break. And it actually came from the person I had met at the Washington Center. And Halliburton Government Affairs is a lobbying office for oil and gas for Halliburton out of Texas. And one of the cool things about Halliburton is Halliburton doesn't actually own any oil. So that's something I learned while I was there. They are the drillers, all the drill equipment. So like, for example, if Chevron owns a rig, they will hire Halliburton to extract the oil. Oil and gas is one of those, it's like, there's some big hot button lobbying areas to be in DC, like oil and gas is one. It used to be the smoking lobby would be like a big one. Gun rights lobbies are big ones. Any of I would say powerful, and so I got to kind of see all of these super powerful people and the way they worked. And I was just an assistant to the executive vice president. But I got to do really cool things. I had to monitor legislation on the Hill daily. If anybody mentioned us, I had to make sure my boss knew about it so he could talk about it and stuff like that. So it was very fast paced and it was very interesting. At the end of a year and a half, I was just, I had such a positive outlook when I first went to DC, but after spending that year and a half in the real world of DC, you get a little disillusioned. You start to feel like, everything, my votes don't matter. It's these people that matter. Like, this is where the real work is being done. I used to feel like people should stop focusing so much on their congressmen. Like, take a look at what these lobbyists are doing. There's just so much power there. And it's a whole atmosphere. There's after work things you have to do constantly. And I was just in a different stage of life that I had decided, I really learned about how things get pushed into Congress, like how you lobby. I then met someone who worked at Deloitte in government consulting. And he was like, when you come over here, though, you get to see what happens after they pass a bill, because we have to enact it. We have to follow through. And so I found that super interesting, which is why I flipped over to government consulting, which I love.
What kind of things did you do as a consultant for Deloitte? Obviously, I had referenced the TSA work that you did because you worked with them. What kind of things did you do?
So when you go into government consulting, they place you at an agency. So, and don't get me wrong, government consulting is its own deal. It's not like commercial consulting. So I'll try to explain that a little bit. Back in the 80s, when we downsized the government, we didn't actually downsize the government. We just moved it all to consulting. So, a lot of jobs that, have to be performed in the government are done by consultants. So it's it's not always just telling clients what they need to be doing, which is a fun part of it, but it's a lot of executing the people's work. And so I got placed onto TSA in the checked baggage department, and it was based out of Arlington, Virginia. So what my specific job is when you check your bag at TSA, your bag goes through this giant screening machine to check for bombs and et cetera, et cetera. The government has to buy those machines from companies, okay? And in order for a machine to be approved, it has to go through this government-funded tests and evaluation program. So that means it has to be tested to make sure it can detect bombs, it can detect high density things, it keeps the flow going. So if they're slow, that kind of thing. Okay. So my job was to manage that test and evaluation process, and it's very long. So I had one machine that literally was still in testing when I left TSA, and I was there for 4 years. It's a very long, hard process.
You were there, you mentioned, for 4 years. After that, you continued to work as a consultant, and you went to eGlobal Tech, still in DC. So you weren't too disillusioned with DC because you stayed there. So what kind of things did you do at EGT?
That's when I found my dream job. So that's when I finally hit that sweet spot of everything that fits my personality. And it's actually what I do today, but I just do it as a government employee. I came in to HHS, was my contractor, or was my client. And I started working on this program called 405D. In 2015, the Cybersecurity Act of 2015 was passed. And in that basically said, healthcare is really behind on cybersecurity. And it is a major target for cyber threat actors because it's lucrative in PHI. People have to get their systems back up, so they will pay any amount of money to get that back up because they need to deliver patient care. And it basically called on industry and government to come together and create a consensus-based set of industry guidelines to help any size organization beef up their cybersecurity. So out of that came this document called the Health Industry Cybersecurity Practices, Managing Threats and Protecting Patients. That is a mouthful, so we call it HICCUP. And no pun intended on the name. In that lays out the top 5 threats, cybersecurity threats facing the industry, and then it provides 10 practices that organizations can implement today and start protecting their patients from cyber threats. And so when I came on, that had just been released in 2018, and I came in 2019, I think. So great, this document gets written, it gets approved, it's pushed out, it's got HHS's seal on it, it's got industry collaboration on it, but how do you get people to read it? So that was my job, is promoting it, getting it out into the public, developing a dynamic communications program that's from the government to help healthcare. And that includes training healthcare. That includes telling them about the 5 threats. So lots of webinars, conferences, speaking, and things like that to get this out. Now, at that point in time, our document was just a helpful guide made by the government. So they had no beef to it. Like, it wasn't mandatory. Like, there are mandatory things that HIPAA puts out that organizations have to do. But this wasn't mandatory. But just last year, there was a new law that came out that basically says it's PL 116321. Anybody in healthcare is interested in this, but it came out and said if you follow the cybersecurity guidelines outlined by 405D, which is our program, then you could be subject to less fines if you did have a cyber attack. So, I mean, we're all working that out on our end on what that actually means. So as a government representative, I'm not saying that that's true yet. We're working that out. I have to say that. And so now, I stayed at eGlobal, and then as consulting goes, you lose contracts, you win contracts, you lose contracts, you win contracts. My company had lost a recompete, which is very common. It's not anything, it's a lot of times downsizing. The government decided they want to go a different route, and they actually did. They decided to do a small business focused account. And anyway, I ended up getting hired because I was good at my job at that time into the new company. And then just this past year, so that this doesn't happen again, I got hired into the government. So now I don't have to worry about my contracts.
You talked about the threats in that document to healthcare. What are the threats?
There's 5 major ones that this document outlines. And the first one is social engineering, or more commonly, a part of it is email phishing. That's just a way that bad actors get into healthcare. The more dangerous one that everybody looks to is ransomware. And that's our second threat. And they're not ranked by how detrimental they are, but ransomware is basically when a bad actor takes over in some form your computer systems, your data management systems, your network, and locks it. And then it says you'll get some kind of notification. It's differently delivered every time, saying, your system is compromised. In order to receive your data back or have access to your networks back, you must pay a certain fee, usually in cryptocurrency. This has been, it happened in Alabama 2 years ago with 3 hospitals. And so the reason why this is such an important thing to think about and to talk about is because they actually had to divert care during those times. So it requires hospitals, small offices to have to revert back to paper when most of your workforce probably has never worked on paper before. And so, just think about if you're a nurse treating an ICU patient, a lot of your information comes on your computer screen. What medicine doses to give, when to give them, everything like that will all disappear. You won't have access to any of that, or you could have the wrong information. That's one of the most, life critical, dangerous threats that we talk about a lot. But the other 3 are accidental or insider data loss, accidentally deleting data or stealing data. PHI, personal health information, is really lucrative on the black market. So stealing, that's got social security numbers, addresses on it. So if you've been to the doctor's office, you filled out one of those forms with all of your info. So those are very lucrative. And then there's attacks against medical devices, which is, just terrifying in its own right. Having an attack on an actual device, changing what the device is saying, and loss or theft of equipment. So if you're in a company and you lose your laptop, that's an easy way for a bad actor to get into your company, steal data information. We educate the country, and also we've now gone international. We just did a conference in the UK and we did one in Canada this past year. It's just an ever-growing threat that keeps getting larger with every year.
You mentioned that it was a dream job for you working with this. You've continued from the global tech company into where you're currently at. Why was it a dream job?
I'm going to tie some of this back to my history too when I answer this. It was a dream job for a few reasons. One, it constantly changes. I constantly have a new set of things to tackle, it's a lot of strategy work. And when you talk about strategy work, a lot of times strategy work is you have your goal of where you want to go. Then you have to develop how you're going to get there. And then you also have to convince your higher ups that this is a good way to go. So one of the things that I really learned in my dynamic history programs, Dr. Keats' classes, Dr. Corley, is whenever you make an argument in a history paper, you have to lay it out in a certain way that convinces your reader. And you really have to think strategically on how you're going to lay that paper out. And yes, I am smalling it down to one paper, but one of the things that I really learned there is that's pivotal in the working environment. You can be anyone in the working environment and have a great idea, but if you don't know how to communicate that idea to someone who makes decisions, because you're not going to be somewhere that makes the decisions for a while. And if you can't do that, then none of your ideas are going to come to fruition. One of the things I really enjoy about this program is it changes constantly. It's growing. So I got in at the bottom floor of this growing program, and it's been great to see it expand and be a part of that expansion and be instrumental in where we're taking this. It's the sweet spot of what I've heard my colleagues say of government work. You're providing a clear service to the country. You are active with the public. So that means I am taxpayer paid, and I feel like this is important, and we can consistently make that argument to Congress that we need to be funded because we are making a difference. And I think that's why I love it so much, is because my job has meaning and I feel very passionate about it in that sense.
Where does your career go from here? With everything that you've done, obviously you've found the thing that you want to be working with, but is this the end or what's the future?
So I see myself staying in government for sure. Where that leads, the sky's the limit. It could be different agencies, because once you're in, it's really hard to get into the government. It's surprisingly, but once you're in, there's, so many different opportunities. I'm going to stick with this program probably for a very long time, just because it is growing a lot. And I see myself being a part of maybe even the leadership position in the future in this program. So I definitely see myself staying with it, and any kind of communications based. So it's very I write a lot. I write content all the time. And as long as my job and my writing skills came from my history degree, as long as, I continue to be challenged in that way and have those opportunities, I'm going to be happy.
What is the one biggest thing that you were able to do at UAB that led to the success you've achieved in your career?
I would say there's a couple of things that were really instrumental in that. And one is the flexibility of UAB. Being able to go into your counselor and say, I really want to take this political science class, but it's not technically going to match my history credit that I need. Can you make this work? Sure. I can, being able to, and that's how I crafted that political history idea, and being the flexibility and also the opportunity of the Washington Center. I would say I had never thought of studying abroad, and I know a lot of people do, and I don't know why I never thought of that until I was about to graduate. But I would say take those opportunities. But one of the biggest things is once you get there, if you do an internship in New York or especially in the country, you have to make the most of it when you're there. You have to do the networking, which is grueling and horrible, but it's so necessary. So I think the flexibility of UAB, and then as I was graduating, me being I want to do a master's. I don't know in what yet, but can I do this program? And then UAB being yeah, just let us know. So it was a very personalized education that you don't get from a larger. Even though UAB is large, it still had that very student-focused, student-driven just plan in front of you.
You have become passionate about the university, and you felt it important enough to get reacquainted with the school.
Yeah.
Why?
I was in DC for 10 years. And then when the pandemic hit, me and my husband made a choice. I get to stay remote with my job. So we made the choice to come back down and live by my family. He's real far from home, from New Hampshire, but he loves it down here. And I guess being back in Birmingham, I see UAB all the time, and I just have such great memories from it. And I'm so thankful for everything I learned there. And I started reflecting on, how proud I am of myself, which I'm not trying to toot my own horn, but it is good to feel proud of yourself. And then, really connecting a lot of that back to my time at UAB. So now that I'm here, I've really wanted to get more involved so that I can, if I can energize students or if I can help alumni in any way.
That's Lisa Joseph. Lisa earned her Bachelor of Arts degree from the College of Arts and Sciences in 2013. Today, Lisa works as engagement lead for HHS 405D, aligning healthcare industry security approaches, a program that raises awareness and provides cybersecurity practices in the world of healthcare. Lisa has a newfound passion for her alma mater and definitely has a good idea of what it means to be a Blazer.
I think it means that you have to trailblaze your own path. You think of the dragon blowing out the fire, and that's one of the great things about UAB is you're not following this is the way to do it, this is the only way to do it. You have to trailblaze your own path, and it really gives you the tools to do that. And so I think that's what it means. It's trailblazing your way to where you want to be in whatever field you're in.
Be sure to listen into previous episodes of UAB Green and Told. Check out our website at alumni.uab.edu/green and told. Have a story to share or know someone we need to get in touch with? Email greenandtold@uab.edu. Finally, be sure to follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search UAB Alumni. Thanks for listening, and until next time, go Blazers.